Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. This ban has not achieved anything. It has just created more frustration and hatred. Now, FIFA President Gianni Infantino's recent call to reinstate Russia has raised eyebrows to the sporting community. Just days before the 2026 Winter Games set off, we sit down now to discuss the world between politics and the pitch with John Carter, sport correspondent here at TVP World. Good to have you back.
Thanks for having me, Sasha.
So let's take this statement here. And he goes on and says here that this has done nothing, this ban to exclude Russia from FIFA, just more hatred. Football is a vector for unity. How do we square that as well with this other, let's say, FIFA Peace Prize for Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, Infantino's obviously got certain allegiances with certain leaders around the world and is, everything we say, you should keep sport and politics separate, but the very nature of FIFA itself is very inherently politicised. And if we think about the way in which, Infantino, the president of FIFA, it came to power and maintains his power, it's by creating these allegiances with various different countries and playing to what suits them and the most powerful countries within that and trying to satisfy, the most countries possible. So looking at it at a kind of global scale, you have to think, where do allegiances lie? And of course, very much in Europe, the strength of argument would be to say, all the institutions, sporting and otherwise, are very much opposed to allowing Russia back into competitive sport. But if we expanded it further and we took it out to, the other continents of the world, opinions are going to vary somewhat. And, in some cases, going to be outright support for Russia. And so people like Infantino and, it's not just him, other people, major figures within sporting bodies are kind of playing this kind of political game and, playing to the field and whatever is going to support them and cement their position.
But, looking also at the trajectory, another thing that he wants to do is he wants to, quote here, enshrine in FIFA law that countries should never be banned for their leaders' acts. So is this giving us sort of permanent immunity for any kind of athlete in the future?
Yeah, let's just say Infantino says a lot of things, right?
Yeah, but he's head of FIFA, so it does mean something here.
It does. And, OK, this is a kind of... I would say, though, I find it difficult to perceive that this would be something... Because, OK, put it like this, then. In order for him, like I just said before, in order for him to pass through such acts, he has to have overwhelming support. And if you think about the governing bodies of European nations, sporting governing bodies, they're just not going to support something like that. They take a stance, it's, considered like a moral issue, and also the way in which places like Russia, they very often politicise their sport and they use it as a method in which to push their agenda, let's say. And so I just don't think he's going to get the overwhelming support necessary for pushing through something like that. All right,
so that's football on one side. Let's also scale out. Let's look at the Olympics. Winter Olympics actually kicking off in Italy on Friday. Also head of the IOC, the President Christy Coventry, has kind of signaled as well that she sees a potential reinstatement of Russian athletes in full under a Russian flag in Los Angeles. That's 2028. But let's look at the Olympics now, the Winter Olympics on Friday. No Russian hockey team allowed, no Russian team, but then there are also certain athletes that seem to be allowed as neutral athletes. So what do we make of that?
Yeah, that's correct. So there is, I think, roughly a dozen or so Russian and Belarusian athletes who've been allowed to compete. There's a certain process that they have to go through. So they can't be affiliated with anyone, military or any kind of governmental institutions, and they have to be vetted by the IOC, make sure that they haven't sort of made any kind of pro-war statements and things like that. So When it comes to the Olympics themselves, they're going to be, there's going to be no national anthem. They're not going to be taking part in the opening ceremony. And so, as taking part as neutral athletes goes, as it suggests, they're kind of neutered in that sense that they're not going to be representing their country, and there's going to be no anthem, no flag, etc. So, that is a way of doing things. And of course, I think it's worth remembering whether or not somebody is supportive for or against Russia and Belarus competing, that the Russians do have a long history with the Winter Olympics, and some of their strongest athletes have been very successful in certain disciplines. For example, in the figure skating, they, both men's and women's and the pairs, it's quite likely that they would have scooped gold. But in fact, some of their athletes have been the most, the figure skaters have been the most outspoken in terms of their support of the war, their support of Putin, etc. And so it goes without saying that they haven't been allowed to compete. So, this is the kind of arrangement that it was come to, and the standard was set in Paris 2024, and effectively the Winter Games has just carried that on and led with the same rules. Okay.
And also I want to jump over to another sport, to tennis. We've recently also had an interesting statement, or rather, what she did, tennis star Marta Kostyuk, who basically refused to shake hands with the Belarusian opponent in that one game, right? She called that a conscientious choice, and also made that speech about saying, well, we should be focused on Ukraine. What kind of impact does that have on that sport in general, global sport, in terms of if we're looking at the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, just regarding the issue of handshakes, etc., that has been par for the course for all Ukrainians competing against Russians or Belarusians. They did that from the very beginning, so that in itself...
At the beginning from the invasion?
Yes, correct. Mm-hmm. And so what Kostyuk did in terms of not shaking hands, that was not, that was standard, but... It was the speech that she made afterwards, so it was in Australia, sort of mid-January, and after the final, where Sabalenka, the Belarusian world number one, she won, and then at the end of sort of tennis tournaments, both the winner and the loser tend to make speeches, and Kostyuk used this to, say and to really to air what she thought about the current state of affairs, and make it very personal about her own, family members, and the way she objected, for example, to Russia targeting, energy infrastructure and the struggles that her and the people connected to her were going through. So I think the reason why that made the headlines was because this speech, and because that was so outspoken. Now, expand that out to various sports around the world. Again, it's quite similar in football and various other sports that, the Ukrainians, players, athletes have not been shaking hands with the Russians. But I would say it's a little bit more pronounced in tennis because of the very nature of the sport itself. It tends to be just this one-on-one. It's a lot more personal, and there's a kind of I was about to say it's a more gentlemanly sport, but of course it perhaps doesn't apply to the women, but perhaps a more kind of gracious and polite mannerisms around it. It's not very, you don't see that so much in football. And so it's perhaps a bit more, it stands out a lot more when somebody, refuses to shake hands because they're expected to be a bit more gracious, and, they stand up and they say, this is not acceptable. And I think, though, there's someone like Kostyuk was quite clear. It wasn't a personal attack or anything like that. But it was just more making a statement.
Okay, making a statement. I think we'll see how also those statements play out now with the Olympics, Winter Olympics starting on Friday. But it certainly will be a topic we'll cover more with you, I'm sure. Thank you so much, John Carter. Thanks for sharing all that in the studio.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching World Talks. But stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.